Hello there everybody, welcome to iTTV. For today's lesson, we're also looking at locomotion and support, but focusing in support for plants. Now today's subtopic is support in plants, whereby we would look at the different ways that plants have the different support systems. Now, as we know, there is necessity for support in plants. Why is it important for plants to have support system? Firstly, to bear its weight as it grows taller and heavier. Secondly, to enable growth towards sunlight for photosynthesis to occur. And thirdly, to hold the leaves in a proper position for the maximum absorption of light. Fourthly, to hold the flowers in appropriate positions so that they can be exposed to agents of pollination. And thirdly, to hold the fruits in strategic positions for the effective dispersal of seeds. So these are the many reasons why it's important for plants to have such a strong and steady support system. Now, so generally, if we look at the flow chart, plants are divided into two types, which are basically the aquatic plants and the terrestrial plants. Terrestrial means that they grow on land, not in the water. So the terrestrial plants are further divided into three types, which would be the herbaceous plants, climbing plants, or known as climbers, and the woody plants. For aquatic plants, they are divided into those submerged plants and the floating plants. So let us have a look at aquatic plants and their support. Aquatic plants, as we looked at just now, can be divided and classified into two main types. The first one will be the submerged plants such as Elodea, Hydrilla, and Cambomba. All these are just the genus names. Floating plants such as Nymphea or water lily, Nelumbium, lotus, Eichhornia, Water-Huacinth, Pistia, water lettuce, and Lemna. So all aquatic plants are supported by buoyancy of the surrounding water. So we have those plants that are submerged, that means they are found at the bottom of the seabeds, and we have those which are floating plants. Now let us look at some pictures of submerged plants like the Hydrilla, Cambomba, and Elodea. These are all the genus names, not the specific species. I'm sure you have seen some of these submerged plants, especially in water aquarium tanks, whereby people rear fish, and then you will see all these different types of submerged plants there to mimic the environment, the natural environment that fishes do swim in. How about, what are the support system in submerged plants? Well, as you know, these plants are totally submerged in water. They have narrow, very thin and flexible leaves. Sometimes the leaves can be highly dissected, as in Cambomba, and they offer little resistance to water flow. The stems and leaves do not have lignified supportive tissues since the plants are supported mainly by water buoyancy. Air sacs are present in the leaves and stems also to help keep the plants afloat. So that's a support system, because all these submerged plants, they must not provide resistance to water flow. So that's why the leaves are very thin, and sometimes they're so finely divided. Highly dissected means they're so fine and finely divided, like this middle picture of the Cambomba. And of course, the stems and leaves are not very steady and woody, they're not lignified, the supportive tissues are not lignified, so that the plants are supported just by water buoyancy alone. And it's perfectly fine for them because they're always surrounded by water. Now, how about some pictures of floating plants? We have plenty. Firstly, you have the Water-Huacinth, known as the Eichhornia Crassipes. And we have the beautiful lotus, known as Nelumbium species. We have duckweed, which is quite common, Lemna. Nymphea, which is water lily, also gorgeous. And the Pistia, which is known as the water lettuce. Water lettuce because it looks like lettuce, but it's, floating on top of water. So, there are two types of floating plants. First type are those with floating leaves and are rooted in the sediment. For example, lotus and water lily, they are rooted in sediments. But those which are not rooted but just float on the surface, for example, water-hyacinth, water lettuce and duckweed. If you notice, duckweed, water lettuce and water-hyacinth, they just float on top of the water, practically just float, and they don't have roots, not much roots in the sediments. But lotus and water lily, they are rooted in something which is in the sediment. But like those, those with just floating on the surface, like the water lettuce, they're just not rooted. And the leaves of floating plants are generally tough. They are firm or leathery because they have to withstand water movement and the weather. So if you had seen all these floating plants before and really felt the texture of the leaves, you notice that it feels really leathery and firm, because basically they have to withstand water movement because they are floating, and they have to withstand harsh weather as well. In addition, the leaves are flexible enough to resist tearing by water action. The leaves in water lilies and lotus are broad and flat to help distribute weight over a large area, thus enabling them to float on the water surface. The upper surface of the leaves are waxy to repel water and help keep the stomata open and clear. So if you realize, the leaves of specifically like the lotus, it's flat. It's to help to distribute weight over a broad area, and the leaves must be flexible enough because it must not be torn by water action, but they must be also really tough because they need to withstand harsh weather, as mentioned just now. Now, let us look at a support system in the water-hyacinth, which has very gorgeous purple flowers, known as Eichhornia crassipes. So, in the diagram, you notice the cross-section of the water-hyacinth petiole. And you notice that there are lots of air sacs in there to help it to float on top of the water. And further diagrammatically, the cross-section of the water-hyacinth root has also a lot of air spaces to allow it to float easily. Now, so we have finished describing about, aquatic plants, those which float on the surface, which are further divided in two types, and you have those which are totally submerged in water, for example, hydrilla. And we looked at the different, structures as well. So let us move on to something else, which are known as the herbaceous plants. Examples of herbaceous plants would be the tomato, balsam, sunflower, and the maize plant. So let us have a look at a cross-section of the different herbaceous plant stem. And in the slide, you notice the cross-section of the sunflower and the maize stem. You notice that there are not a lot of air sacs, for example, as compared to those in aquatic plants. And if you notice, in herbaceous plants, they have a lot of special tissue known as the Parenchyma Tissue. Now, what are Parenchyma Tissue? It is the most common and abundant ground tissue found in herbaceous plants. When there is sufficient water in the ground, the thin-walled cells will take in water by osmosis and become turgid. The turgidity of the parenchyma cell provides mechanical support to the herbaceous plants. If the parenchyma cells do not get enough water, they will become flaccid and the plant will wilt. So for this, to help you understand better, I would go to the board to help you to explain. Now, for parenchyma cells, alright, you notice that, that they're the most abundant ground tissue for herbaceous plants. And one thing we do notice is that they have very thin cell walls, really thin cell walls, okay? I mean, as compared to other plant cells. Generally, plant cell walls are really thick. Okay, so hope that you can see this clearly. Okay. And cell walls are generally made of cellulose. So as you can see here, okay, so this will be the thin cell wall, and this is known as a parenchyma. It's a parenchyma cell, and of course naturally would have the nucleus. Now, so the nucleus, I would shade it. Okay, this will be the nucleus. So what happens would be that when there's sufficient water in the ground, water would go in through osmosis. Okay, so when there is enough water, water goes in through osmosis. Okay, the process of water going in from regions of high to low concentration will be known as osmosis. And what happens is that the whole plant cell will become turgid. So then after that, the cell becomes turgid. Now, however, if there is not enough water, then of course, then water doesn't enter in through osmosis, and in contrast, the cell becomes flaccid. Opposite of turgid is flaccid. And of course, it's important for cells to become turgid to provide the mechanical support for plants. So it's very important for cell to become turgid because this provides a form of mechanical support for the plants. Okay, so water is important to maintain the turgidity of the parenchyma cells to lend some form of mechanical support for the plants. Alright, I hope that you have a clear understanding of the importance of water for maintaining mechanical support in plants by maintaining the turgidity of the cells. So let us look at a different type of tissue which is found in herbaceous plants. We're still looking at herbaceous plants and what are the support that they have. The second type is known as the Collenchyma tissue, and if you notice that they have irregularly thickened primary cell wall, as you can see in the high resolution electron microscope picture. The cell wall is irregularly thickened. Now the cells are thickened and they help strengthen the plant. They are specialized for support for primary tissues. If you notice, the cells are elongated with walls, especially corners, that are thickened with pectin. Pectin makes the stem strong but pliable. Collenchyma cells are alive at maturity. So Collenchyma tissue are also there for support for the primary tissues, and the cells are elongated. Besides that, the stems actually are strong because the cell walls are thickened with pectin, with irregular amounts of pectin, thereby producing irregular thickness of the cell walls. Let's look at the third type of tissue important for mechanical support in herbaceous plants, known as the Sclerenchyma tissue. So the Sclerenchyma tissue consists of very long, narrow cells with thick and lignified walls and are usually pointed at both ends. The cells are fiber-like in appearance and hence are called sclerenchyme fibers or fibers. Sclerenchyma cells are abundantly found in plants in patches or in layers. They are dead cells that give strength and rigidity to the plant body. Now, the difference between sclerenchyma and parenchyma as well as collenchyma cells is that sclerenchyma cells are dead. They are not alive. They're just there in patches or in layers to give strength and rigidity to the plant body so the plant can maintain upright. It is interesting that sclerenchyma cells, they look like fibers. That's why we often call it sclerenchyma fibers instead of sclerenchyma cells, because they are very thick and lignified walls and are usually pointed at both ends. So the cells are also fibrous in appearance, so thereby the name fibers. Now, let's look at xylem, or known as woody tissue. So in the microscope picture, you notice that xylem is below the phloem, and xylem are actually consisting of different types of xylem tissue. For example, we have xylem vessels, we have tracheids. Tracheids share similarities with Sclerenchyma in the sense that they are pointed, they are tapered at both ends, pointed. But the difference would be that tracheids have pits. They have little holes to allow water to diffuse from one pit to the other. But of course, in this way, water movement is less efficient as compared to movement of water in xylem vessels, which are just long hollow tubes, continuous tubes. So water moves easily without any obstruction in the xylem vessels. So, the supporting and water conducting tissue of vascular plants consisting of xylem tracheate, xylem vessels, xylem fibers, and xylem parenchyma. It's primarily made of tracheids and xylem vessels. The tracheids are elongated dead cells with tapering ends. They are characterized by the presence of a thick cell wall consisting of primary wall and a secondary wall. The primary wall is composed of cellulose, whereas the secondary wall is made up of lignin. So, tracheids share similar physical properties like the Sclerenchyma cells in the sense that they are dead, and secondly, they are elongated, they have tapering ends, and thirdly, they all have thick cell walls. But tracheids, they have primary and secondary cell walls. Alright? So, the xylem vessels are long cylindrical dead cells characterized by a thick lignified cell wall. The thick and lignified walls of xylem tracheate vessels fibers provide tensile strength and mechanical support for plants, enabling them to stand upright. So, xylem vessels are also dead cells, and they have thick lignified cell walls, and therefore that comprises the characteristics of xylem tissue. Now, we just now looked at herbaceous plants and the different types of mechanical support that they have in the form of parenchyma, sclerenchyma, and collenchyma cells, as well as the xylem fibers as well, or xylem vessels and xylem tracheids. Now let us move on to other types of plants and examine the different types of support that they have. Let's look at the climbing plants, or known as climbers. For example, the pea plants, bitter gourd plants, and Gloriosa plant. Climbing plants are plants that use other plants or rocks or man-made structures for support in order to obtain sufficient sunlight. These plants have long and thin stems with diffuse branches. They often develop special organs of attachment such as tendrils, thorns, prickles, and small adventitious roots, or clasping roots which enable them to cling to neighboring objects or plants for support and for assistance in climbing. So it's really interesting. I'm sure you have seen some of these beautiful flowers around, like the rose, bougainvillea, and the rattan vine plant. All of them, they are climbing plants with thorns because they will use man-made structures or other plants for support in order to obtain enough sunlight for photosynthesis. How about other techniques, other organs of attachment? Well, there are climbing plants with clasping roots, like the money plant or the black pepper plant. They have, special clasping roots. So, let us move on to other types of plants, which are the woody plants. Now, they are plants that use wood, mainly secondary xylem, as its structural tissue. Woody plants are mainly perennial dicotyledons that are usually either trees, shrubs, or lianas. A plant with true woody stems contain wood, which is primarily composed of structures made of cellulose and lignin. So, a perennial refers to plants that live more than 2 years, because there are plants that die after a period of time or die maybe after 1 year. So perennial plants are those which live quite a long time. So most woody plants undergo secondary growth by forming new layers of woody tissue or secondary xylem each year, and so increase their stem diameter from year to year. The new wood that is deposited on the inner side of the cambium forms a concentric ring known as the annual ring or growth ring. The support provided by the woody tissue enable trees to grow to great height and hold the branches and fruits produced off the ground. So as you can notice, these woody plants, they actually add new wood on the inner side of the cambium, which forms a concentric ring every year. As the plant grows taller and taller every year, they add another ring in their stem. So the stem diameter will just increase. I'm sure you have seen some of these woody plants, like the redwood, in the United States. They are very tall woody plants, but let's look at local context, because example of woody plants would be the rambutan and the mangosteen tree. As every year they grow, they add another ring. They add another wood that forms a concentric ring. But there are also shrubs that are also woody plants that don't grow so tall. For example, the hibiscus rosa sinensis plant or the melastoma plant. They are shrubs but are also categorized as woody plants. Even lianas are also categorized as woody plants. Lianas are very thick and woody perennial climbers commonly found in the tropical forests. They twine themselves around tall trees in search of sunlight. Now, lianas, they are climbers because they are commonly found in tropical forests. They try to climb around other trees, twining themselves around trees in search of sunlight. Now, have you watched Tarzan? Tarzan basically uses the liana plant to swing from tree to tree. So that long rope that he uses to swing with Jane from tree to tree is known as the liana tree, which is a woody plant. Now, so let's look at the diagram of a 2-year-old woody stem. So on the outer part there is the bark, and the bark is made out of cork, combium and phloem. And sometimes this cork part is used and it's processed to create the cork stoppers for wine bottles and alcoholic drinks. Then inside we have the crushed primary phloem, and of course if you go inner, there is the secondary phloem for transport of organic substances such as glucose. Moving in, we have the primary xylem, and we actually, of course, if you have primary, you have secondary xylem. Now there is summerwood and springwood, if you notice, which compose the second annual ring of secondary xylem. The first annual ring is inner, and then as the tree grows another year, there is a second annual ring. So a lot of researchers have noted that they can actually determine the age of the woody plant by looking at the number of annual rings that it has, because every year the plant will actually add one ring into the stem of the plant. So this is a 2-year-old woody stem, so it would have 2 annual rings added. Now let's look at a cross-section of a 3-year-old woody stem. Now, do you notice the 3 annual rings? Yes, it's very obvious that there are 3 annual rings in this 3-year-old woody stem. So it's obviously right that you can tell the age of a woody plant by counting the number of annual rings that it has in the cross-section of its stem. Now, let us look at something different. Let's look at special adaptation structures that plants have to further support them. For example, you will see the buttress root, stilt roots, and prop roots. Many tropical rainforest trees, they have roots that extend above the ground as a plate-like outgrowth of the trunk. This type of root is called the buttress root and can rise 10 meters high before blending into the tree trunk. Buttress roots provide extra stability, especially to the tall and heavy forest trees. Certain trees such as rhizophora and screw pine have stilt roots, whereas the maize plants have prop roots. Now, generally prop and stilt roots help give support to plants growing in shallow, wet soils. So as you can see, buttress roots are gigantic roots that we often see in jungles and tropical rainforests to give that extra stability to allow the tree to grow to massive heights. Because how can a tree grow to, to be so tall if the root system is not developed and extensive? So they need to have really strong roots, that will actually cover a large surface area to provide extra stability in case of, strong winds and thunderstorms and harsh weather conditions. Like now with unpredictable climate changes, with cyclones and everything, the trees need to have extra mechanical support. And in addition, the stilt roots and the prop roots, which we often see in mangrove trees, mangrove forests, because the soil is very low, very shallow, and it's very swampy. So they need to have stilt and prop roots to allow the roots also to breathe as well. So with that ends our theory for supporting plants. Let's look at some questions. Which of the following is not a reason why plants need support? A. To bear its weight as it grows taller and heavier. B. To grow towards sunlight for photosynthesis to occur. C. To hold fruits in strategic positions for the effective dispersal of seed. And D. To grow towards the ground to get sufficient water. Now, what do you think is the answer for this question? The answer is actually option D. If you did not get this answer correct, it's okay. Good try. I'm sure you can. With practice, you'll be perfect. Now, remember there are those, floating plants. Floating plants, they don't have to grow towards the ground, because for floating plants, you also have those which are not rooted. So it's not necessary for plants to grow towards the ground to get sufficient water. But option A, B, and C are definitely all legitimate reasons why plants need support. To bear weight, growing towards sunlight, to hold the fruit in strategic positions, they're all correct. Moving on, the diagram below shows two types of cells from a plant tissue. Which of the following does not have the above tissue? A. Balsam plant, B. Hydrilla, C. Lotus, D. Water-Huacinth plant. Now look carefully at the diagram. Firstly, you must try to think, what are these two cells? And slowly think about it. Now, if you look carefully, those are parts of the xylem tissue. Generally, those are tracheids. So tracheids are actually pointed at one end and they have pits. But the picture on the left will be the xylem vessel. So these two are the most common cells of the xylem tissue, which will be the xylem vessel and the xylem tracheid. So the plants that don't have xylem will generally be the submerged aquatic plants, because for aquatic plants you have the submerged and you have the ones that float on top of the water. So the submerged ones, it's not necessary for them to have lignified supporting tissue, because they just totally depend on the buoyancy of water. So that's why of all these options, the only option which is one of a submerged plant is Hydrilla. And Hydrilla has very diffuse leaves, and the answer is B. Now, third question. The diagram below shows the cross-section through the stem of a plant. And the stem most probably belongs to A. Sunflower, B. Water-Huacinth, C. Maize, and D. Rambutan tree. Now, if you study this diagram, let me give you a bit of a tip. You notice that there are a lot of air sacs there. So what about plant needs a lot of air sacs? Now, in the theory just now, we looked at a cross-section of different aquatic plants. We didn't look at a cross-section of submerged plants, but we did look at a cross-section of several floating aquatic plants. And the only The only aquatic plant that is floating in this list is the Water-Huacinth plant, which is very pretty purple flowers. And because it's floating, it needs to be light. And in order for it to be light, the stem has to have a lot of air sacs. So the answer for this question is obviously option B. The rest are all woody plants. Now, next question. Which of the following is the major supporting tissue in herbaceous plant? A. Parenchyma, B. Collenchyma, C. Sclerenchyma, and D. Xylem. So this one is a bit of memory work. What do you think is the answer? Yes, you're right if you said A, Parenchyma tissue. I even drew one on board that it is the major supporting tissue in herbaceous plants. Let's look at the following question. Now, the diagram below shows various part of plant stem P, Q, R, S. Now, which part of the stem forms the major supporting tissue as the plant grows? So what do you think is the answer? Do have some time to think about it. Yes, if you know from the question, this part of the stem that forms the major supporting tissue as the plant grows should actually be the xylem, right? Do you remember that we looked at xylem? That basically a woody plant uses wood, mainly secondary xylem, as a structural tissue. So, if you notice which part is it that is the xylem tissue, and if you study carefully the diagram, it would be section R. Section R is the xylem, and thereby the answer is C. Section R is the xylem, which provides the major supporting tissue as the plant grows. Well, basically that ends our lesson for today. I hope that you were able to grasp difficult concepts and principles for the supporting tissue in plants. I'm sure you can take time out to just study through, and you'll definitely ace your tests. Thank you so much for watching iTTV. I really look forward to the time with you. So I look forward to also see you the next time on another chapter of biology. So have a great day. Thank you.